Well, screw me. I started writing this theory like a month or so ago, but I put it on the back burner for theories that I thought were more important, or at least I felt like I had to make soon. But now John from FNaF and Rytos made similar videos on the topic, so I'm thinking I've just got to get it done now. Trust me, even if you think these videos will cover similar things, they aren't. All of these videos have sort of different conclusions, and I recommend checking out the other videos, but this is my take and interpretation on things. Onto the original script, everything from here on out is as I originally wrote and planned it. You know, if this was the only FNaF game and it was created on its own in a vacuum, FNaF 4 would have been one of the best narrative. It has emotional story beats, the jump scares are really detailed, the character designs are really detailed, the gameplay is... I have my own problems with it, but don't worry about it. But the second you consider in the context of being the intended conclusion to a franchise, or even just the inflection point in a franchise's storytelling, it becomes the most frustrating game in the lore. I would say almost all significant debates in lore, things like Golden Freddy, Gregbot, all of that stems from this one game's existence and how events in it play out. But what if I told you there was a way to explain everything in this game, and it almost certainly was canon before being retconned? You probably know it, but probably only through the game theory variant of this theory, but this theory runs so much deeper than that theory ever presented. To put this in perspective, I think MapHack covered like the surface of the iceberg in your how far does the FNaF 4 rabbit hole go down tier list. I feel like there are so many little details, so many things you can explain and expand on, and it covers everything, and it isn't just, it's all a dream, that's all there is to it. I want to make something clear though. I don't think Dream Theory is canon anymore. I feel like Scott's post around the time make it clear that whatever the original intent of FNaF 4 was, he wasn't fully satisfied with it. And I think by the time Sister Location comes out, he had pretty much completely 180'd and ditched it. That said, what was the original story being told here? Just note that we're going to work with what this story was meant to be. So we have to stick with FNaF 4 and FNaF World as our latest entries in the series and information prior to that. So let's just go down the list of the original game theory things that were covered, just so we have it for the sake of coverage. FNaF 4 is the only game with a digital alarm clock instead of a grandfather clock. However, we see in both the night and day segments there is a grandfather clock in this household. This implies that FNAFs 1 through 3 end with a crying child waking up from his nightmares when the clock chimes. However, while in the hospital, which we see in the flowers and IV drip, he's woken up by a digital alarm clock. It doesn't make sense for a grandfather clock to be in any of the FNAF locations, which would make sense of this weird little just kind of random detail Scott put in the first 3 games, because Scott loves making details retroactively important. The idea of Toy Chica missing its beak, which was specifically called out by Scott, and the broken Funtime Foxy toy, or Mangle toy, being destroyed implies that FNaF 2 was born from action figures he saw of the characters. FNaF 1 is based on his plushies, with the damaged Foxy toy being destroyed, which is why Foxy is out of order. FNaF 3 is born from this kid saying his Spring Bonnie plushie toy is a finger trip that clamps down on you. This combined with seeing someone in a bunny costume, he misunderstands what he sees and creates the idea of the Springlock suits, or maybe they are real suits. Point is, that's where the idea of FNaF 3 comes from. Because of Pigtail Girl, he invents a scenario in his head, this story of kids being kidnapped and killed inside the pizzeria. And his brain, as a nightmare does, invents a scenario where that's the worst case thing he would have to experience regularly. In this context, his brain comes up with the idea of being a security guard where he'd be forced to stare and be around the animatronics all night. He thinks of the guy in the back room he saw putting an employee in a costume and thinks that guy is stuffing and hiding the body there. Of course he isn't, he's just helping the people perform. But he sees all these things, people going into costumes, gaps in the costume where you can see eyes, and he thinks that this man in the back room is stuffing them all, burying them all, hiding them in the costumes, and that they're coming to life at night to hunt him and chase him. What this leads to is the final, most extreme series of nightmares in his comatose state, FNaF 4. Everything he remembers, everything he was afraid of, all of the nightmares he had before blur together. These animatronics have 5 fingers in this rotten design like Springtrap. They have this plush exterior and the faces and color palettes of the original characters, but have the heavy, coil-like ring and design of the endoskeletons from FNaF 2 in the toy animatronics. He's in a coma, nothing makes any sense anymore, it's all just mashing together in this horrific chimera chasing him every night. His brain is damaged, everything is completely irrational. FNaF 4 is literally the final chapter of this kid's fears and nightmares. And if you don't think it's intentional, what would the whole Toy Chica missing her beak thing mean? Why would 4 games be in one story at this point if this wasn't intentional? Because this game, without Dream Theory, has nothing to do with the prior games. All of this combined with the phrase, "what's seen in shadows is easily misunderstood in the mind of a child," makes the most sense around dreams and its implications. How do you explain all of these things coming together, all of these games coexisting in one final game satisfyingly? Arguably satisfyingly. And that's kind of where the original game theory in 2015 ends. That's the kind of conclusion. It's just, oh, all of these things link, therefore it's a dream, bye-bye. That's not satisfying. And I think MapPow was a little too harsh on the theory, and I think he didn't go far enough into the implications of this, because I think it isn't just a dream. There is one real supernatural element in all of this. Psychic friend Fredbear. Keep in mind, the entire concept of the Aftons didn't exist yet, so FNaF 4's story is built from a fundamentally different standard of who characters were and what their relations were. You can't think of it in the modern sense. So if we look at it from, we don't know who these characters will be, but what the characters were, we can paint a very different story of this family and this character cast. There's one element from the prior games that had no explanation or presence in normal FNaF 4. It did kind of appear in the DLC, but it was specified to be non-canon. The one character up to this point that was by far the most cut and dry in their backstory, one of the characters that rivaled Purple Guy and Golden Freddy in popularity and importance, and yet is seemingly completely gone in this game. The puppet. There's no toy of it, no mention of it, it's not in Fredbear's anywhere. The closest thing we see is the fact that the bite victim has white stripes on his shirt. Yet the bite victim's death is nothing like the one we see in FNaF 2, nor is this explained away by Dream Theory. The bite victim's mind can come to the MCI just from Pigtail Girl and his bullies being kind of mashed together into this scenario where they're all being stuffed and hidden away. But it doesn't explain the puppet in any context. The puppet was one of the most important things in the series and one of the biggest kind of ambiguous characters for what their conclusion was going to be. So why would they not be here at all if this is the big finale to the series, wrapping everything up? So I'm going to propose there was one true supernatural aspect to this game. The possessed psychic friend Fredbear plush, who is the puppet, and also the bite victim's sister. Okay, I'm just going to have to paint a little bit of a narrative here. Okay, follow me on this one. This girl dies, or maybe more accurately goes missing. So combined with the mysteries of Pigtail Girl talking about kids being stuffed into the suits, the crying child thinks that his sister was killed by this shady employee and stuffed and hidden away, causing him to have all the original nightmares of the first 3 games, in which he thinks of how people would have been stuffed and hidden away, inserting his brothers and his friends into these sort of nightmarescapes where all of them are killed and hidden away. This is why Golden Freddy is slumped and inactive. It's his fear that he would be stuffed into the costume and start roaming with them. A slumped suit waiting for him. Meanwhile, in the real world, the possessed plush that his sister is using to kind of communicate with and protect him through is trying to prevent him from being killed by her killer, who is still around. But ultimately, in an ironic twist, it's not being killed and stuffed into the animatronics that does him in, but being killed by the animatronic and left to the hospital. In his final days in bed, he's tormented by the most horrific versions of his fears, everything brought together. The bullies who tormented him, the animatronic that ate him, before it all becomes complete nonsense, fracturing into this weird abstract monster. It's worth noting the classic animatronics disappearing, leaving only Fredbear, is the same order of events as the Night 6 cutscene, where the classic characters Bonnie, Chica, Freddy, and Foxy disappear to make way for Fredbear and eventually Nightmare. On the flip side, his sister's work isn't finished yet. Her unfinished business is to protect her brother and put him back together. He never got his party. He never got to be happy and satisfied. She is the minigame version of the puppet, but she isn't just the literal puppet. She is the abstract force of the protector, regardless of what form she takes. She has a task. She has to help him get his happiest day, what was robbed from him. She takes the fragments, the pieces of bite victim's memories, the toy chick on the ground, everything that he remembered, the kid with the balloon, the shadows of the animatronics on the walls, the animatronics themselves, this broken toy of Funtime Foxy. The puppet uses these memories, which have become scattered abstract trauma, to try and build a party for him he should have had. Notice how every single clue from Dream Theory is something that is linked to the gameplay and minigames for Happiest Day. This is all to give him a faux birthday party, something to at least cover for what he didn't get. The box? It's just all the pieces put together. The Golden Freddy mask from Happiest Day. The the one he was supposed to wear in the real world to celebrate his birthday party. But the parents, or maybe even Proto-Michael, locked it away in grief. And maybe there would also been some clues that the puppet was an abstract other character like the plush, but that's beside the point. Because now that I'm done being a little dramatic and going on it from a narrative standpoint, I want to explain this evidence a little bit more. I think Charlie and Elizabeth stemmed from this same sort of loose character archetype of being the sister, keeping the bite victim away from the original killer, which would be a sort of proto-William. This is still the purple guy phase of his character, before the family connections are established. I think a common misconception in this franchise is when Scott said there was only one true retcon, that this was some subtle thing that had to be hidden. But the placement of it and the phrasing of it is important. Firstly, this came out before FNaF 6 happens. But looking at what Scott considers important or largely considered is almost completely induced by game theory's videos. And lo and behold, MatPat said Dream Theory was unsatisfying, and then in every single theory following it, even before Sister Location comes out, basically tries to prove Dream Theory wrong, even when it stops making sense for how he's escaping it. So, as a community, when Scott says it was largely unnoticed or people didn't really consider it for the most of the fandom, he's right. Game Theory didn't consider it after a while, even though they popularized it in the first place. So as the community went, it just was treated as if it was never true, even though it was true for at least some point in time. So Dream Theory would be the one true retcon, that these events are no longer a dream. They are not metaphors, they're not abstract. Gosh diggity dang it, Scott said. Who do I make second friend Fredbear if the puppet's an actual character that's floating around in the franchise at some point? I got it. It's his dad talking to him. Wait, then who's his dad and why is he talking to him? Maybe he's the killer. I'll borrow the one from the book. But why is he a killer in this continuity? That's not what he is in the books. Maybe he's trying to figure out how to get his son back. Wait. What do I do with the dropped sister plot line in this whole room in FNaF 4? It's this girl Elizabeth. It's her. She's a new character. We'll make a game about her. Who's Charlie now? The one from the books. Just a separate kid who died on her own. Wait, how do we have the murdered kid from the MCI and bite victim coexist? And the rest is history. Sister Location is basically the patchwork for everything in FNaF 4 since it was no longer a dream. That's why there's this weird breaker room stuff implying that there are actual animatronics in the house. Part of the solution was splitting the minigames and gameplay into different people to set up the older brother's plotline now that he wasn't just meant to be the antagonist for this game. Someone had to be doing all these things that we see in FNaF 1 through 3, so why not make it this one guy, the older brother, who's trying to avenge his brother and what he did? And it had to have some way for someone to experience both FNaF 1 and FNaF 4 now that it's no longer a dream. Now that there's an actual FNaF 1 pizzeria, someone had to have been there. To make this clear, I don't think FNaF 4 is necessarily non-canon or anything like that. I think Scott just had to find a way to make every single thing in it more accessible to the series and the fandom as a whole, rather than just being this one weird note where it ended and no one understood what the ending was. I think moving forward, we just have to accept what these changes were and how they were made to correct things, and look at FNaF 4 in a looser sense. This is why I say in the modern lore, or as it is now in most of my videos. I have no doubt that the original Psychic Friend Fredbear was meant to be supernatural. I have no doubt that the purple guy was meant to be unrelated to the crying child originally. And I have no doubt there was meant to be one family that included the puppet, Golden Freddy / the bite victim, and this abstract older brother who was just kind of himself. But that isn't the narrative we have now. I have no doubt this is what FNaF World was about, showing that there was a real aspect to things, that it wasn't just a dream, that there was some supernatural elements still in the series. I feel like part of Golden Freddy's inconclusivity and how frustrating he is just because he comes from having to retroactively justify two completely separate concepts and how they would have to coexist without them being a dream. The original fifth missing kid from the first 3 games and the bite victim now have to exist in one continuity as real characters and not just one being the figment of the imagination of the other. I could go into detail with this, but I think this is a good starting point to get the idea across. So I guess that leaves one question. Was Dream Theory actually better even if it's too late to understand it now? No, it still sucks. Gosh diggity dang it, Scott said. I don't know why he sounds like this. Why?